Hi, it's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. Glad to be back with you. We're going to continue reading in our story, Little House in the Prairie by Laura Ingalls Wilder. So, yesterday, if you remember, Pa finally got home after his long trip to town, and he had a lot of nice things for them. And they would have enough that he wouldn't have to leave again for a long time. That's good. Chapter 18. The Tall Indian. I hope my kitty doesn't bother this too much. Hey, be nice, Sky. In those 3 days, the northerner had howled and screeched across the prairie till it blew itself out. Now the sun was warm and the wind was mild, but there was a feeling of autumn in the air. Sometimes we call that fall. Indians came riding on the path that passed so close to the house. They went by as though it wasn't even there. They were thin and brown and bare. They rode little ponies without saddles or bridle. They sat up straight on their naked ponies and did not look to the right or to the left, but their black eyes glittered. Laura and Mary backed against the house and looked up at them. And they saw red-brown skin bright against the blue sky, and scalp locks wound with colored string and feathers quivering. The Indians' faces were like the red-brown wool that Pa had carved to make Ma a bracket. I thought that trail was an old one they didn't use anymore, Pa said. I wouldn't have built the house so close to it if I'd known it was a highway. Now Jack, he hated Indians, and Ma said she didn't blame him. She said, I declare the Indians are getting so thick around here I can't look up without seeing one. As she spoke, she looked up, and there stood an Indian. He stood in the doorway looking at them, and they had not heard a sound. Goodness, Ma gasps. Silently, Jack jumped at the Indian. Now, I don't remember if I showed you this picture or not. Isn't that funny? So that old trail, that was the Indians' trail. Pa caught him by the collar just in time. The Indian hadn't moved. He stood as still as if Jack hadn't been there at all. How? He said to Pa. Pa held onto Jack and replied, How? He dragged Jack to the bedpost and tied him there. While he was doing it, the Indian came in and squatted down by the fire. Then Pa squatted down by the Indian, and they sat there, friendly but not saying a word, while Ma finished cooking dinner. Laura and Mary were close together and quiet on their beds in the corner. They couldn't take their eyes off that Indian. He was so still that the beautiful eagle feathers in his scalp lock didn't stir. They didn't blow at all. Only his bare chest, that means he didn't have on a shirt, and the leanness under his ribs moved a little with his breathing. He wore fringed leathered leggings, and his moccasins were covered with beads. Ma gave Pa and the Indian their dinners on 2 tin plates, and they ate silently. Then Pa gave the Indian some tobacco for his pipe. They filled their pipes and lighted the tobacco with coals from the fire, and they silently smoked until the pipes were empty. Now see, that was being neighborly. All this time, nobody had said anything, but now the Indian said something to Pa. Pa shook his head and said, No speak. A while longer they sat silent. Then the Indian rose up and went away without a sound. My goodness gracious, Ma said. Laura and Mary ran to the window. They saw the Indian's straight back riding away on the pony. He held a gun between his knees. Its end stuck out on either side of him. Pa said the Indian was not a common one. He guessed by the scalp lock that he was Osage. Unless I missed my guess, Pa said, that was French he spoke. I wish I'd picked up some of that lingo. Lingo means language. Let Indians keep themselves to themselves, Ma said, and we'll do the same. I don't like Indians underfoot. Pa told her not to worry. That Indian was perfectly friendly, he said, and their camps down among the bluffs were peaceable enough. If we treat them well and watch Jack, we won't have any trouble. The very next morning, when Pa opened the door to the stable, Laura saw Jack standing in the Indian trail. He stood stiff, his back bristled, and his teeth showed. Before him in the path, the tall Indian sat on his pony. Indian and pony were still as still. Jack was telling them plainly that he would spring if they moved. Only the eagle feathers that stood up from the Indian's scalp lock were wavering and spinning in the wind. When the Indian saw Pa, he lifted his gun and pointed it straight at Jack. Laura ran to the door, but Pa was quicker. He stepped between Jack and that gun, and he reached down and he grabbed Jack by the collar. He dragged Jack out of the Indian's way, and the Indian rode along on the trail. Pa stood with his feet wide apart, his hands in his pockets, and watched the Indian riding further and further away across the prairie. That was a dern close call, Pa said. Well, it's his path, an Indian trail, long before we came. He drove an iron ring into a log of the house wall, and he chained Jack to it. After that, Jack was always chained. He was chained to the house in the daytime, and at night he was chained to the stable door because horse thieves were in the country now. They had stolen Mr. Edwards' horses. Jack grew crosser and crosser, that means crabby, because he was chained. But it could not be helped. He would not admit that the trail was the Indian trail. He thought it belonged to Pa, and Laura knew that something terrible would happen if Jack hurt an Indian. Winter was coming now. The grasses were a dull color under the dull sky. The winds wailed as if they were looking for something they could not find. Wild animals were wearing, I think I forgot to show you a picture. This is what it looked like. Were wearing their thick winter fur, and Pa set his traps in the creek bottoms. Every day he visited them, and every day he went hunting. Now that the nights were freezing cold, he shot deer for meat. He shot wolves and foxes for their fur, and his traps caught beaver, muskrat, and mink. He stretched the skins on the outside of the house and carefully tacked them there to dry. In the evenings, he worked the dry skins between his hands to make them soft, and he added them to the bundle in the corner. Every day, the bundle of furs grew bigger. Laura loved to stroke the thick red fur of the foxes. She liked the brown, soft fur of the beaver, too, and the shaggy wolf's fur. But best of all, she loved the silky mink. Those were all furs that Pa saved to trade next spring in Independence. Laura and Mary had rabbit skin caps, and Pa's was a muskrat. One day when Pa was hunting, 2 Indians came. They came to the house because Jack was chained. Those Indians were dirty, and they were scowling or frowning, and they were mean. They acted as if the house belonged to them. One of them looked through Ma's cupboard and took all the cornbread. The other took Pa's tobacco pouch. They looked at the pegs where Pa's gun belonged. Then one of them picked up the bundle of furs. Ma held baby Carrie in her arms, and Mary and Laura stood close to her. They looked at the Indians taking Pa's furs, and they couldn't do anything about it. That wasn't right. He carried them to the door, as far as the door. Then the other Indians said something to him. They made harsh sounds at each other in their throats, and he dropped the furs. They went away. Ma sat down. She hugged Mary and Laura close to her, and Mary felt Ma's heart beating. Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. Well, Ma said, smiling, I'm thankful they didn't take the plow and seeds. Laura was surprised. She asked, what plow? The plow and all of our seeds for next year are in that bundle of furs, said Ma. When Pa came home, they told him about those Indians, and he looked sober. He said that all was well that ended well. Kitten's about to knock everything off. Come here. That evening, when Mary and Laura were in bed, Pa played his fiddle. Ma was rocking in the rocking chair, holding baby Carrie against her breast, and she began to sing softly with the fiddle. Wild-robed an Indian maid, bright Afatera, where flows the water of the blue Juanita. Strong and true my arrows are in my painted quiver. Swift goes my light canoe adown the rapid river. Bold is my warrior good, the love of Aphrodite. Proud wave his sunny plumes along the Juanita, that plumes of feathers. Soft and low he speaks to me, and then his war cry sounding, rings his voice in thunder loud from height to height resounding. So sang the Indian maid, bright Aphrodite, where sweeps the waters of the blue Juanita. Fleeting years have borne away the voice of Aphrodite. Still flows the waters of the blue Juanita. So what this story is talking about is an Indian maid, which would be a girl Indian, and she was in love with a brave. That was a young brave. But many years had went by, and he couldn't hear her singing anymore. Maybe she was gone. But the waters of the blue Juanita were still there. Ma's voice and the fiddle's music softly died away, and Laura said, where did the voice of Aphrodite go? Goodness, Ma said, aren't you asleep yet? I'm going to sleep, Laura said, but please tell me where the voice of Aphrodite went. Oh, I suppose she went west, Ma answered. That's what the Indians do. Why do they do that, Ma? Laura asked. Why do they go west? They have to, Ma said. Why do they have to? The government makes them, Laura, she said. Now go to sleep. Said Pa. He played the fiddle softly for a while. Then Laura asked, please, Pa, can I ask just one more question? May I? Said Ma. Laura began again. Pa, may I? What is it? Pa asked. It was not polite for little girls to interrupt, but of course Pa could do it. Will the government make these Indians go west? Yes, Pa said. When white settlers come into a country, the Indians have to move on. The government is going to move these Indians farther west any time now. That's why we're here, Laura. White people are going to settle this country, and we get the best land because we were here first and take our pick. Now do you understand? Yes, Pa, Laura said. But Pa, I thought this was Indian territory. Won't it make the Indians mad to have to? No more questions, Laura, Pa said firmly. Go to sleep. And that's where we're going to end. It really wasn't very fair, was it? To run them off their lands. I know everybody had to have a place to live. Still, it's pretty sad. Well, it's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure and subscribe. Push that bell notification so you'll know each time I tell a story or put another type of video on. And if you know anybody else that might like this type of channel that I have, please share it with them. If you have a Facebook, you can share it on that. You can share it on Messenger. You can just tell people about it. Help my channel grow because I love doing this and I hope you're enjoying it too. Well, whatever you do, keep dreaming. Sky and I are saying goodbye. Good night.